Hi, and welcome back from the break. Thank you, Will Greenwood, Mina Anand, Becky Wright, and Pritesh Mudhavia for the previous session on Does Culture Eat Strategy for Breakfast in Financial Services. We're here to discuss the DEI backlash. Is it fake news? Is it another rebrand? Or is it another line in the sand? So I'm here to introduce the speakers, and then Tamara will be giving us an introduction to the CMI's research into managers, inclusivity, and organisational success. So Tamara Box is chair of the CMI Women's Advisory Committee. She's also a well-known senior business leader, best known as a former managing partner for EMEA at Reed Smith, a recognised champion of diversity and inclusion in the legal profession, and she's led major global practices while shaping policy decisions on gender equality, leadership, and the future of work. Welcome, Tamara. Nice to see you again. After that, we'll be joined by Paul Wilder, who's a senior advisor at Warburg Pincus LLC. Paul is also a highly experienced business leader in financial services, with a track record of driving transformation and growth across some complex organisations internationally. And he's known for his focus on innovation, regulation, and customer outcomes. He brings deep strategy, expertise, navigating industry disruption, and aligning leadership. And finally, Mark Lomas. Mark is the head of culture of Lloyd's of London. Mark is one of the UK's most respected voices on diversity inclusion. Currently, as I said, at Lloyd's, but he's previously had award-winning strategies at HS2 and the BBC, where he's built a reputation for being widely regarded as one of the people who really is leading the way on turning measurable business impacts into reshaped culture in organisations. So without further ado, over to you, Tamara. We're delighted to hear what you have to say.
Thanks, Raj. And I'm delighted to get to introduce this really important panel. I know it's going to be a lot of fun. So look, most of us in this forum have been committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion for many years. But today, the backlash against DEI has caused many companies to rethink and frankly, even retrench their goals and strategies about this important element of their businesses. First of all, we're so used to saying DEI that few of us stop to consider what each of these words actually mean. So I'd actually like to take us back to basics for a minute. Let's start with the D in diversity. Despite what some detractors say, diversity is not about ticking boxes on ethnic or gender or other forms of representation in our organizations. It doesn't mean coming up with targets or quotas that allow a pie chart of the staff to look in line with the demographics of a particular country or community. It doesn't mean picking someone to fill a position solely because of their color or gender. And certainly it doesn't mean putting unqualified people in positions that demand certain skills and expertise. But let's back up a little bit further. Why do we need diversity? The life cycle of a company depends on its ability to come up with new ideas to keep up with the changing market, as well as the changing technological advancements. Companies who stagnate, who fail to find these new ideas, inevitably fail as businesses. So I want you to consider Blockbuster for a minute. I know this is ancient history, but stay with me for just a minute. Blockbuster was founded as a home video rental store in 1985, when the first retail Blockbuster location opened with an inventory of some 10,000 VHS and beta cassettes. People would watch movies from the comfort of their own homes and for less than the cost of a cinema ticket. It was novel. The concept was a huge success, and by 2004, there were over 9,000 retail outlets around the world. Blockbuster was a household name. Competitors opened similar stores, but Blockbuster was king. What Blockbuster's leadership failed to consider was that not all competitors were other stores that looked like them. Netflix was looming, ready to attack Blockbuster's customer base with a different way to rent movies. Reed Hastings, the founder of Netflix, proposed a merger with Blockbuster back in 2000, but he was, as was widely reported, laughed out of the room. There's more to that story, but let's cut to the chase. Blockbuster failed to innovate, to re-strategize in the face of changing customer taste and technological improvements, preferring instead to stick to their retail model with its money-making late fees that provided a large part of their profit. Instead of owning the home video market by becoming Blockfix or Netbuster or whatever it would have been, they said no thanks to the innovative new model. By 2010, Blockbuster had filed for bankruptcy, and by 2014, they'd closed all of their corporate retail stores. By 2016, franchise stores also surrendered. There is one store that still remains open, by the way, in Bend, Oregon, and while it will still rent you a video should anyone ask for it, it's actually a nostalgic museum that sells movie-themed merchandise. So the golden years of Blockbuster are clearly no more. Did Netflix kill Blockbuster? No, said Jonathan Salem Baskin in Forbes in 2013. The internet didn't kill Blockbuster. The company did it to itself. And as the old adage goes, insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Blockbuster stuck to its previously successful strategy because, well, change is hard. There's comfort in we've always done it this way, but innovation is rarely coming without disruption. Someone has to stand up and say, let's try something new. Traditional leadership teams with their look-alike managers and their mimicry of group thinking simply aren't agents of disruption that is needed to be different. For that, we need different people. And that's all diversity is, difference. Difference in background, difference in expertise, difference in opinions, and of course, difference in ideas and indeed perspective. Could diversity have saved Blockbuster? Very possibly, but we'll never know. What we do know is that we can change our own companies by understanding the importance of bringing in diversity before stagnation causes them to fail. So diversity is not evil, it's not racist, it's not discriminatory, it's not any of those things that the current backlash folks want you to believe. It's simply a business necessity that we have to harness if we want our own future successes. So that's why we need diversity. But what then? Well, this is where we come to the next one. Diverse viewpoints need to be heard. And that's where inclusion comes in. Inclusion's about people, not spreadsheets, not numbers, not stock value, but the actual individuals who form the basis of what your company is all about. The ones who do the work, who build the markets, who enhance the organizational image. They're your most important assets. So you want to make sure that you're getting the most return for your investment in them. In order to do that, you need inclusion, which consultants at PwC describe as having three elements: belonging, fairness, and trust. Belonging is having a sense of connection and a shared purpose with colleagues. Fairness, they say, may be self-explanatory, but it includes ensuring that everyone has an equal voice and that they're heard and respected regardless of the position they hold. Trust means believing in the reliability and integrity of your leadership. Within the Chartered Management Institute, we have emphasized that talking the talk is not enough. We need to walk the walk, starting with the all-important facet, inclusion. For us as leaders, where do we begin then? I'd like to think we start with the trust element. We need to be reliable. We need to have integrity. We need to do what we say we believe in, to be open to new ideas wherever they come from. Ensure that every member of our organization feels respected, valued, and heard. Seek out the ones that will be creative enough, frankly, brave enough, to speak the truth to power. Maybe if Blockbuster had listened when someone told them that they were about to be put out of business by some upstart that didn't even have one retail store, they might still be in business today. The same could be said, by the way, for BlackBerry, Commodore Computers, Nokia, who in fact stuck with voice when data began to rule the cellular market and then were overtaken by Apple and Samsung. And Xerox. Did you know that Xerox invented the personal computer? And then they lost interest in it because it didn't fit with their strategy of photocopying. So good ideas come from good people. And in good businesses, good people are encouraged to be innovative, respected for their ideas, and rewarded fairly for their contribution. So that's inclusion. Now let's get to the last, the middle letter in DEI, equity. It's hard to measure, but perhaps here in the UK, because we take so seriously the data around pay gaps, that can be at least looked at. Gender pay gaps, ethnicity pay gaps, disability pay gaps, and more. The CMI report, Filling in the Gaps, highlights some of the organization-wide issues that arise when we have pay gaps. First of all, they impact hiring. 64% of managers consider the company's gender pay gap when deciding whether to join an organization. including 24% who say it's a major factor in their decision-making. 1/3 of the managers surveyed said they had failed to apply to a particular position after reading the company's report on disparities in pay between men and women. So let me say that a little different way. 1 in 3 of the leadership applicants that your company is seeking said, no thanks, I don't like that you don't pay men and women equally. That equates to about 500,000 potential managerial colleagues whose contributions went unrealized. It's a huge loss of talent that, who knows, may have included the one whose voice could change the future for the organization, the one whose innovation could actually open up new markets or new products or new directions, maybe even the one who could have shown Blockbuster how to live another day in something other than the case studies in business schools. So the E in DEI is not just about trying to offer a hand up to help someone who hasn't been treated equally or fairly, although that's, of course, in and of itself laudable. Once again, the benefits go beyond individuals. Our success and our failure in achieving equality in our workplaces can directly impact the company's bottom line. Equity, like its companions, diversity and inclusion, is business critical. Furthermore, CMI reports that where HR leaders report that their workplaces view DEI as business critical, 75% of them say that their organization is meeting most or all of its overall objectives. Well, that compares to only 47% of them who say that in organizations who don't share this business critical view. So organizations that value DEI are more successful. It's that simple. So I just wanted to ground us in what DEI is when practiced with intention and at its best. But just like businesses that need to innovate to thrive and survive, so surely does DEI. Perhaps we also need to seek out the different voices, perspectives, indeed experiences, to ensure we're not missing something. Perhaps not all criticisms of DEI are fake news or thinly veiled racism, sexism, homophobia, or classism, but rather indications that even DEI is excluding some, ignoring important voices that might make it better and more sustainable. I'm not saying there isn't some vile and hateful and frankly simply wrong and misguided stuff out there, but rather that somewhere in most criticism, especially if it's coming from many voices, is some kernel of truth. And if you believe in the power of DEI, then listening and searching for that truth so as to innovate, include, and make DEI really live up to its best intentions is surely the right thing to do. So how do we wade through the propaganda, the vilification, and yes, even the hate, to find some ways to common ground, to better, to even more inclusive DEI efforts? That's the challenge in this current time of backlash, and one that I hope we'll be able to explore during this next panel session. Recognizing that we have representation here from a diverse range of voices, I hope you'll trust that this is the place to amplify your voice, to express your views, and to help us to find those innovations that we know DEI can provide. Thank you.
Lovely little balance here, haven't we? Thank you, Tamara. We've got someone who's worked globally in financial services, someone representing the CMI and professional services, and Mark has worked across a number of infrastructure and financial services organisations. But I always think at Green Park, one of the things that we should always be wary of is the people who are not in the room. And the person I'd like you to consider for the first question, my dear panelists, is that person who's in the room, who works in his organisation. I say he on purpose. He said all of this stuff about D&I, he said all of this stuff about bring my whole self to work. He's made real efforts to change how he manages people in his business. But he also is confused. He's got people saying, well, you told me to bring my whole identity to work, but your corporate values don't match mine. The person next to me is pro one side of Israel and Palestine. I'm pro the other. My manager is pro take this stuff out of my face. I've got stuff to do. There's confusion. There's generations in there There's generations in the workplace that haven't been there before. And so when this little window opens to say, well, D&I is a bit of a distraction to your bottom line, I run towards that because it's a safe space for me. So let's consider that person as well. So, Mark, when people say DEI is dead, do they mean the label, the funding, the impact, and is there any truth in this claim from your perspective?
So I think you can't ignore all of the noise. I think Tamara said it really, really well, that everything has to innovate. And when faced with disagreement or debate, you need to do some reflection and understand what is driving it. So do I think diversity, equity, inclusion is dead? No. Personally, I'm not bothered what you call it. People call it inclusion, belonging. I'm not bothered what the label says. But I do know that a couple of things are true. And you can, people can debate things like diverse boards equals better companies. We can debate that. What you can't really debate is the changing nature of the UK population if we just stick with the UK for now. Working age populations are broadly 14% ethnically diverse, 51% women, 18% disabled, 20% social mobility background. Most organizations are struggling to reflect the UK as it looks today. Fast forward to university, that's nearly 34% ethnically diverse, 57% women. The percentage of disabled people going to university is becoming proportionate with the population. Those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds are now more likely to be going to university, and that number is up from about 7 to 15%. So your talent pool is changing, and that's the inevitable bit about it. And if your talent pool is changing, so is your customer base. So I don't care what you label it. I think the strategic importance of it remains exactly the same. It's your talent pool, it's your customer base, it's your supply chain.
Thank you, Mark. And Paul, do you think that the stories about a backlash are in some way exaggerated or part of a wider manifesto, or do you think there's actually some genuine criticisms that we have not considered on why diversity and inclusion hasn't added some of the value it's promised in businesses?
I think, yes, it is exaggerated. Yes, I think it is part of a manifesto. I personally find it worrying, scary. I think when you have brought your whole self to work, to kind of reference your opening remarks, Raj, then you've done so because you feel safe and secure in that environment, that you can take that risk and be transparent about who you truly are. Now there appears to be a little bit of a risk associated with that because of some of the commentary that's been out there, in the press. I think that the reality is that whether you call it DEI or anything else, a lot of organisations have been sort of sticking to their guns and have sort of supported their staff and focused on rather doing the right thing by them as employees, and equally thinking about the impact beyond their employees, to their customers, to their investors, all of those kind of stakeholders.
And Paul, you made a point about investors there. Given your broad financial services and professional services background, have you seen any evidence that particularly institutional investors have continued and turned some of the rhetoric from a few years ago into actions in this area? Or has it been something that is probably still a stick that is in the background but's never actually hit anyone?
I think it's a stick that some activist investors have been using. I don't think that's actually stopping anything. It might be slowing things down momentarily and acting as a distraction. But I think the reality is most senior management recognise the value of DE&I and having a diverse workforce for some of those reasons that Tamara referenced in her opening remarks.
Tamara, I'm going to come to you, and then I'm going to come round the panel on this one, because I think it's important to show a bit of who we are and perhaps be a bit more bolder than other panels would be. Are any of these criticisms of diversity legitimate?
I think realistically, yes, there are some criticisms that are legitimate. And what they're really telling us, they're not the sort of more hate-filled in, but they are telling us there are people who feel left out in our rhetoric around DEI. And I think, given how important the I is in DEI, we have to listen to that. There is no question in almost every organization, there will be, you said he, there will be, a white, straight he who feels that all the things that we talk about as values and all of the effort we've put into DEI leave him out. And leave him out of important opportunities, just the same way that the very people DEI was designed to help accelerate, he will feel he is being left out of those possible programs, opportunities, et cetera. So I think realistically, we have to take that criticism on board and figure out how to do inclusion right, how to really get everyone in the same room on this. It doesn't mean everyone has to think the same or believe the same things, but it certainly means you can't ignore a voice you don't want to hear in the moment. And so I think that is the legitimate criticism. There are people who feel left out of our efforts at inclusion, and by definition, that means we're failing at inclusion.
Thank you. Mark, are there any of these criticisms genuine and things that really we should be challenging ourselves on before we try and fix the next problem?
Yeah, I think disagreement and debate is absolutely necessary, right? And one of the conversations we're constantly having in the Lloyd's market is a very friendly and networked place to be. But friendly is not the same as inclusion. And an inclusive environment does invite challenge, and it does invite disagreement, and it does invite debate, but it invites it and expects it to be held in a respectful way. So I think it is incumbent to listen to that debate. If I'd say where are things and where are those criticisms potentially legitimate? If you're not careful and you take a single characteristic approach, or you're not listening to a dual voices, etc., then inevitably at some point in your progress, you are going to run into the what about me. And over a period of time, that is legitimate. And I think sometimes what organizations fail to do is have a really clear data story. Well, if I'm doing X, I'm doing it for this reason. But there has to come a point, and I'm a big believer in metrics, targets, ambitions, but also there's a point at which you have achieved them or come close to it. And then you need to pivot. And there are other aspects which you need to take into account. So I think in some ways, we cannot close our ears to that kind of criticism. And I think as you get a broader spectrum of social mobility in the workplace, it gives an opportunity to pivot. That being said, I think as practitioners, as leaders, as managers, we have to be really clear that this idea of meritocracy doesn't exist at the moment anywhere. And part of good diversity and inclusion practice is about objective, evidence-based decision making. We can take the characteristics out of it. The more objective and evidence-based it is, the better that outcome is going to be for any and all types of diverse groups. So yes, I think there's legitimate criticism, but done at its best, I think there are some really comprehensive answers to that criticism.
I've got a supplementary for you, Mark, before I come to Paul. You spoke there about data. So in terms of the people listening in, what advice would you provide around what data is useful and at what stage collecting data becomes its own distraction? Because you understand what the problem is, but you're addicted to providing spreadsheets and reports instead of taking any action on the problems that you know exist in your organization. So how can people in their own organization guide on the right balance between data collection and moving away from this kind of nil-sum thinking, which is, well, whatever Mark gets, Paul doesn't, and whatever Tamara gets, all the men in the group don't get. So, how can you help them take data and give it a purpose that's relevant to that organization?
The thing are two things. Number one, we can't collect any data. It's too hard. I don't think that's true. But going back to what Tamara said, there may be a trust factor in it. So go and deal with that. If they're giving you the data and you're not doing anything with it, well, why should they trust you? So trust is a number one factor in that. Then, you can be quite transparent with data. For example, we're transparent with the makeup of the organization, the number of internal appointments, what the recruitment stats say. So that lets everybody know, okay, so this is how things are playing out. And that data tends to dispel this. If you don't have that data, and we have it across kind of all aspects of our employee lifecycle, but if you don't have that and you're constrained by systems, it's a really good old-fashioned way of gathering some information called listening to people. And I find if you don't have the systems to collect the data, you can do some informed listening and then take actions on that.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I was clearly listening to both Mark and Tamara there. When listening to Tamara, I was reminded of an experience I had working with one particular organization where when looking to roll out a DEI policy, the commentary that was relayed to me was, we're going to focus on the women's strategy first, because we can't do it all at once. And logically, I understood that couldn't do everything at once, but at the same time, I felt a little bit left out, because from an LGBTQ+ and disability perspective, are they less important? So I think related to that kind of experience and those kind of thoughts is the importance of clarity of strategy. So you need to communicate what the plan is. And I think that communication can't be from on high. That needs to be to pick up to include the employees in the decision around where is that focus going to be first. And that may well tie in with some of those data points that you've got, because you're going to understand the makeup of your workforce by geography or by business line, and you can kind of take it from there. So I think it's going to be considered in that way, and sort of apply those different lenses to it. So it really kind of is taking it back to basics to then sort of take it forward again. I think equally you've got to keep in mind that different organizations are at different points on their own journeys around D&I, and more sophisticated, mature, long-standing organizations are likely to have something that's more established in place. Now that can be a point of reference and a learning point for other organizations, and the organization that I referred to when I started answering this question was very much starting its journey around DE&I. So I think you want to keep those elements in play as well.
Thank you, Paul. I really like that point about different types of organisations. Tamara, the CMI looks after a really broad range of organisations of different sizes and industries, etc. What do you say to leaders who, for whatever reason, are really feeling the pressure, whether it's political, reputational, or financial, to try and scale back any form of involvement or investment in diversity and inclusion? And I'm thinking specifically from the perspective of someone who kind of does believe in this, does think it should be part of the organisation's future, as opposed to one of those people who've been waiting for an opportunity to pull the rug for a while. So how can we help those people or help our guests in there watching us go away from this with a few ideas on, refocusing and restructuring in a way that takes the organisation forward, but also deals with the reality that many leaders are facing at the moment in terms of pressure?
Sure. And I think that is the reality. Many, many leaders are facing that, bottom line pressure. And there is that tendency, I think, to think that DEI is a nice to have rather than a must. And it is why I wanted to focus on some of these business critical aspects of DEI, because what you're really saying is, I want my business to thrive, but I'm going to cut back or not buy, if you will, critical supplies that allow me to produce my product. And that's how we have to figure out, how to position what DEI is about. It's about best possible talent. It's about talent that actually might come from a place of perspective that you don't have. It's the talent that might help you innovate or disrupt your own business. And it's the talent that might help you have the new idea or the new product that's going to grow your business. If you're thinking of it that way, then the investment you're making is just like buying the supplies that make your product. It's just like, investing in your retail store that, attracts your customers. These are critical investments. Now, they shouldn't be hugely expensive. We should always be focused on great talent. We should always be focused on, as business leaders, innovating our businesses, looking around the corners, trying to figure out what are our competitors doing? In fact, what are the competitors we don't know about, starting to look at or do? So it shouldn't be something that really is kind of threatening bottom line. But I do understand that when we position it as this nice fluffy thing over here, then it's easy to say, I don't have time for that right now. I'm trying to save the business. And that's where I think it's incumbent upon all of us who understand and hopefully can convey that what DEI offers you, and however you want to position it and whatever language you use, is the chance to have the people in your business who will help you grow, thrive, survive, in difficult times, innovate, etc. And that's really the critical, to me, sort of thinking around how we have to move DEI. Again, I'm with Mark. I don't care what language you use. It's about, are you getting the best people in your business? Are you getting them bringing their best ideas? Do they feel brave enough to speak up? Do they challenge you when you say, I'm going to keep doing what I always did? If those are not yes answers, then it's DEI that you're failing on.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have our own report from about 700 companies coming out tomorrow on the race inclusion gap. And the relationship between people's perceptions of diversity and inclusion in their organizations versus the reality of lived experience and priorities are quite fascinating. Paul, I wanted to try and keep with this thread that Tamara spoke about. In your experience, having worked for many perhaps upper quartile organizations in terms of the sophistication of diversity and inclusion, their departments, their investments, etc. Is it more difficult to change people's minds when they're at that stage, or when they can feel a more direct link between being good at talent attraction and talent retention and getting a broader range of appointable candidates versus a more sophisticated organization that perhaps has practice their narrative so much that changing their mindset is a much bigger challenge?
I think that it's, in my experience, those more sophisticated, mature organizations have a better kind of focus on and infrastructure around DE&I. I think with newer or younger organizations, they're so focused on catch up in so many different ways that they spread themselves thin. And there are consequences of that and trying to do too much at once. So when you've got that sophistication of a mature company, where you've got, I'll use this as an example, the A to Z of responsibilities, where they're divided up, A to F's one team and G to L's another, and so on and so forth. When you get to those younger organizations, you tend to find that the A to Z is with one team. It's not split up. So I think that then leads to challenges from a kind of a capacity perspective, the ability to get things done. You can have that aspiration and that plan and that desire, but can you execute? And that's often what's hard. So I guess that goes back to my earlier comment about the organisation that said they were going to focus on women first. I get it, you've got to start somewhere, but I think what was missing there was having that clarity of strategy and having buy-in from the workforce that, yes, everyone agreed we're doing that first, and then we're going to move on. So for me, that's about kind of meaningful representation. And I've often used a term when I speak about D&I, which is nothing about me without me, and it's making sure you've got the right people that have a seat at the table to debate how you're going to move it forward. Sorry, I think I've gone off a little bit of a tangent there, but I think I've answered your question.
No, that's good. Look, I want my panelists to share their experience. It's not about my questioning, it's about helping what we're trying to do. And I think that did that, Paul. And I just want to just stick with you for a second on this idea of execution. So is execution about having the skills to do things where there is will there? Is it about, today's hiding place for any form of non-progress culture? Is it about leadership commitment? What is it that actually helps these things continue moving forward? And then I'll ask you, Tamara, the same, and I'm going to throw Mark an awful curveball about execution and changing people's minds afterwards. So get ready, Mark, it's coming.
Well, I'm going to start by picking up on a CMI phrase that Tamara used earlier about talking the talk and walking the walk. It's about translating it into a reality, and I think you need to be able to turn those thoughts and ideas into actions. So you've got to demonstrate that by doing something. Now, whether that's about looking at accessibility in its widest form within an office environment, you're looking at policies and procedures, you're looking at floor plans, you're looking at hiring, retention, promotion, you're looking at websites. All of these things can be done at relatively low cost. They don't huge time. Turn something into a reality, which it can be demonstrated then to the workforce, and hopefully kind of gets the right kind of responses. One thing I haven't touched on yet, and I wanted to pick up on the fact that this is a global talent conference. I know Mark referred to the UK, but I think one of the other overlays has got to be culture. You've got to be culturally aware. So you can argue that sitting in the UK, Paul, as a white Caucasian man, is in the majority, not the minority. When I lived in Singapore, it was the opposite. So you've got to think about it from different perspectives and put those different lenses in play when you're developing the policies, and also thinking about how you're going to turn your plans into a reality.
Thank you, Paul. Tamara, do we need to be more narrow in the outcomes that we're trying to achieve through diversity and inclusion at the moment?
I don't think so. I actually think we need to be broader. And with that, I guess, I'm with Mark on data led. I think that's really important. But I think what that data should be telling us is that we have things to interrogate, not the answers. When we look at data for our organizations, if we take similar data, for example, that Mark used for universities and did that for our organizations, who's in our organization? We should interrogate if, the majority of our entry level is female, for example. But that doesn't then consistently stay the same as we rise through the ranks. That doesn't mean there's an answer. It doesn't mean you automatically decide the answer is, we need to put more women into, the answer to that to me is interrogate that data and figure out, what are we doing? Is there something happening at a position or a place in our organization that is inhibiting the progress of a certain demographic? Again, there's loads of data we can use. Is there something happening in the way we actually attribute value or performance, manage people, that is different for different people? So I think in a lot of ways, the execution, I wish there were, some tick box, that we could go, here's the answer. I think that's our problem in a lot of ways. We've looked back and said there must be a solution, and we expect that solution to be one size fits all, not only for every organization, but also for every demographic. And that won't be true. What instead we need to do is really know our organizations well, know our talent really well, and figure out what at every stage of both the talent progress and pipeline, but also in terms of every demographic, can we do as businesses to make everyone hit their highest level of potential and performance? That's not easy, and it's certainly not a tick box exercise. It's not a target, it's not a quota. It's really more about making organizations better. It's about talent management. That's what it really is about. And I think that's the execution dilemma, frankly, because it's not one person's job in one organization. It's not the DEI lead. It's not even the HR lead. It's everyone, top to bottom, in the organization that has to have a role in how do we manage our talent in such a way to get the best performance out of every single demographic, every single person in our organization, every single function. That's deep.
I'm going to come back to that idea around talent management towards the end. If there are questions from the panel, please do put them in the chat. Now, Mr. Lomas, in many years when you retire, the thing that you will probably be most famous for is getting £50 billion worth of government contracts procured with D&I in the scoring system, and with some export of good practice into the companies that won those contracts. Would that even be possible now? And what lessons on change management did that enormous undertaking, which was successful, give you that you can share with our listeners?
Sure. So I think number one, Paul's comment about global context here is really important. So is it very possible in UK mega project procurement or even UK government procurement? The answer to that is a definitive yes, it's possible. You need to have the will to do it and the skill to do it, but yes, it is very possible. And you do see that continuing in a number of pockets. In a US context, far more difficult. We've seen that already. So I think the context is there. In terms of change management, I think the best approaches to diversity and inclusion are ones that solve a problem. And the problem at that point was we've got a huge requirement. We don't have enough skills. We're not bringing enough people through. It's not an attractive industry, or wasn't. The industry is not only made up of a small amount of direct employment, it's made up of a large subcontracting and supply chain element. So the traditional approach of just attracting talent by itself doesn't work, because it's about how it's cascaded through the supply chain. So I think, and number one, recognize what the issue is and recognize the context you're working in, and then understand what the levers are to enable that change. But I think similar to kind of working with a massive supply chain in Lloyd's market, it's not just good enough. It's not good enough to set out the problem and then the requirement. You have to be part of that solution as well. And so I think it's doubly important. When we did that at HS2, we provided lots of tools and programs and support and sharing best practice across supply chain, same way we do it in the Lloyd's market. And I think that's because that group industry-wide brain focus on a way forward with an agreed framework does help program. So yes, it was a big undertaking, but people got on board because there was money. So there was a financial incentive, there was a talent incentive to them, and also then when it came to winning more contracts, well, they could demonstrate their activity as a kind of and as an additional extra compared to their peers. And so when you're designing a big diversity program or approach, yes, A, know what the problem is you want to solve, B, know how to measure it, and C, make sure you understand what support is going to be required to get there. And many brains is definitely better than one.
Thank you, Mark. So let's get some quick fire answers. We've only got a bit of time left. I've got a question from Joanna Clark. You can't be what you can't see. Please can the panel share their thoughts on the importance and value of quotas for hiring and promotions? A minute at most. Keep it punchy. Paul? Paul, you're on mute, so I'm going to ask you to unmute, please.
There you go. Sorry, my apologies. I see value in it, but equally, for me, it's a bit of a pendulum, in that I want the best talent. So if I'm interviewing people, what I'm trying to do is just think about, right, best person for the job. That's kind of my primary, but I then overlay it. So I try to kind of keep in all elements in consideration. Do I get it right every time? No. Am I trying to get it right? Yes. But it's a work in progress.
Tamara?
Look, I think you can't be what you can't see really is about role models. And so you do have to interrogate yourself if you don't have those role models. I think quotas are, a sort of using a sledgehammer when you need, just a little bit of a tap for a nail. It doesn't mean you don't think about things like your short lists and your long lists and make sure that you've actually gone out and looked for diverse talent. But I don't know that using a quota is ever going to be the right answer because of its sort of blunt force, if you will.
There's a question here about anonymized CVs. I'm not going to give that to the panel, Tomini, because I don't want to get into a conversation about why I should have to hide my identity in order to get into your recruitment process. But there is a question here around why do you think the backlash in the US is the backlash in the UK is less than the US? And no American bashing. We love our American brothers and sisters, most of them anyway.
Look, I'm happy to tackle that with an American accent here. So, though very much a Brit, just to be clear. Look, I think the reality is there is a wave, and waves start somewhere. And the US is certainly the ground zero, if you will, for the DEI backlash and for some of the things that we are seeing, in the way of, pure self-interest and, this sort of sense of me first. That doesn't mean that wave isn't coming to our shores. It's not here. And I think we've always, if you look at, going all the way back, we've always had a more proactive government, for example, on many of these issues. I can certainly say that from the 30% Club perspective, the government's involvement in, what happened there was critical. So I think we have a great foundation in the UK for that not being as bad, but don't kid ourselves that it isn't here and coming, harder and faster. And I think we have to therefore be ready.
Yeah, and so Trevor Phillips is doing something tomorrow morning on our research on the asymmetric workforce and managing polarization. Mark, both Sharon and Sloan would love to hear your view on quotas.
Right. Well, I'll keep it really short and sweet. Again, depends on your global context, right? A quota in UK law is unlawful, so that's illegal, and you shouldn't do it. In the US, it's slightly different. That also is changing in terms of the scope of affirmative action, but at the moment, the two are rather different. For me, I don't think you necessarily need targets in promotion. If you have the evidence that says who's going into your process, how they're doing, and where they're dropping out within that process. if you're finding, for example, that you have you have a great number of people in the pot and you're getting similarity out the end, the best thing you can do is treat it like an engineering problem. Go find the point in the process that's broken and fix it. Naturally, you will have some, naturally you fix it, but do measure it and hold people to account. So a target or an ambition is very different than a quota, and depending on your situation or context, that may be useful. But the data, evidence, and holding people to account for fixing the process, I've always found is more effective.
Thank you. That brings us to the end of our session. Tamara, thank you for sharing your thoughts and the work of the CMI. Paul, lovely seeing you again. Thank you for sharing your experience. And Mark, always a pleasure. I hope everyone's enjoyed that as much as I did. The next session, run by Will Greenwood, is on whether culture eats strategy for breakfast, looking at spotlight for UK industry, so outside financial and professional services. Thank you to my panelists, and thank you to everybody else who spent time with us, because time is the most valuable thing we have.